Her son was abducted 20 years ago. Then she saw his face on a magazine cover. There was nothing unusual about that morning. The coffee dripped. The faucet leaked its steady rhythm into the stainless steel sink. Light pressed through the window, catching the corner of a photo frame that hadn't been dusted in weeks. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, sorting through grocery coupons she rarely used. It was just something to do, ritual more than necessity. There were no sounds from upstairs anymore.
No soft footsteps.
No giggles behind doors. Not in 20 years. She left the house at 10:07 a.m., same time she always did on Thursdays. The corner store was quiet. Most people were at work or school. That suited her. Crowds had never been easy after the loss. She walked slowly down aisle 3, checking the expiration dates like she still cared even though she didn't. At the register, she placed her few items on the belt. Milk, bread, coffee filters. The woman in front of her was flipping through magazines, one hand on a toddler's shoulder. That's when Margaret saw it. A cover photo, brightly lit, polished. Startup star of the year. Ethan Cross. He looked 25, maybe a little older. A handsome young man with close-cropped brown hair, light stubble, sharp jawline. But it was the eyes. Steel gray, with that faint tilt at the corners. Her hand trembled. The cashier asked if she wanted a bag. Margaret didn't answer. She reached for the magazine with careful fingers, like it might vanish if she moved too fast. She didn't even buy the rest of the groceries. Just the magazine. Walked out into the cold with it clutched to her chest like a relic. Sat in her car, engine off, and stared. It was impossible. But she knew. She knew those eyes. She had kissed them goodnight. She had looked into them the day he vanished. 20 years ago, her son, Jacob, disappeared from a church fair. He was 4 years old, holding a balloon, laughing about something sticky on his fingers. She had looked away for maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20. When she turned back, he was gone. No one had seen anything.
No scream. No struggle.
Just air where a child had stood. And now here he was, maybe, smiling from the front page of a business feature, wearing a suit, talking about venture capital and green tech startups. The article title burned into her eyes. The Man Who Invented Himself. She flipped the pages carefully, heart pounding. The profile was 5 full pages long. He'd been adopted at age 5, the article said. No known family. A closed case file. The lucky break of a lifetime. According to the adoptive father, a California lawyer. Ethan had no memory before that. Just flashes. Nightmares. A voice he could never place. Margaret's throat tightened. Couldn't be coincidence. Not just the eyes. The hairline. The way he smiled slightly off-center, just like Jacob had when he was being shy. She turned to the last page. A photo. More casual. A candid of Ethan at a company barbecue. His button-down shirt sleeve rolled up slightly. On his shoulder, just above the bicep, a birthmark. Small. Star-shaped. Faded now, but still there. She had kissed that birthmark every night until he turned 4 and told her he was too old for it. Margaret pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. The store faded. The years fell away. And in the quiet of her parked car, the world tipped back on its axis. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But she knew. Jacob wasn't lost. He was alive. Margaret sat in her car long after the store's parking lot had emptied. The magazine rested in her lap, open to that final photo. Ethan's arm, the birthmark, his face in profile as he laughed with people who had no idea he used to be someone else. Jacob. The name echoed, familiar and hollow all at once. She drove home slowly, clutching the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Her street looked unchanged. The neighbors' cars still sat in the same places. Mailboxes leaned the same way. But her world had tilted. Inside, she laid the magazine on the kitchen counter like it might break. Then she went to the hallway closet. Top shelf. Plastic tub marked Jacob, 1999. Inside were drawings, socks, a toy truck missing its front wheels. And at the bottom, a manila folder. The police file. Dog-eared. heavy in her hands. She flipped through the papers. The last photo of him before he disappeared. A school portrait in a red sweater, his smile showing a new gap in his front teeth. She laid the photo beside the magazine page. The resemblance wasn't theoretical. It was undeniable. Same eyes, same arch in the brow, even the exact freckle above his right lip. She stared until her vision blurred. Margaret picked up the phone. She still had the number Detective Glenn Rourke. Retired now, but he'd always said, "If anything ever comes up, anything at all, call me." It rang 3 times. A voicemail picked up. "You've reached Glenn. Leave a message." Her voice trembled. "Detective, it's Margaret Reynolds. I think I found him. I think I found Jacob." She hung up, then sat in the kitchen in silence. The hours passed slowly. Afternoon crept into dusk. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. She answered on the first ring. "Margaret. Glenn. Tell me everything." They spoke for 40 minutes. She described the article, the photo, the birthmark. Rourke didn't interrupt. He only asked one thing. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "I'll look into it," he said. Quietly. That night she didn't sleep. She laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, the magazine resting on her chest. 20 years ago, Jacob had been 4. He would be 24 now. Ethan Cross was 25. Had no memory before age 5. She knew what people would say, that she was grieving, that it was projection, that the mind invents closure where none exists. But this wasn't invention. This was recognition. The next morning, she called the magazine's listed editorial number, asked to speak to the reporter. The assistant transferred her. A woman answered, young-sounding, crisp voice. "This is Allison Chun. Miss Chun, my name is Margaret Reynolds. I read your article on Ethan Cross. I think he might be my son." A pause, then laughter, polite but dismissive. "That's not possible. Ethan was adopted. He's very well known. His background was vetted. He has no birth records before age 5, Margaret said, voice hardening. "Your article says so." "He was adopted out of state," the reporter replied carefully. "There's no way to know. He has a birthmark on his left shoulder, a star. I have photos from when he was 3, and your picture shows the same thing." Another pause, this one longer.
I'm sorry,
Chun said, "but this isn't something I can verify. Please don't contact our offices again." The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone. It wasn't just disbelief. It was resistance. As if no one wanted the story to change. As if Ethan Cross had already been claimed by money, by myth, by the image carefully built around him. She looked at the photos again. One of Jacob, holding a juice box, grinning. One of Ethan, shaking hands with a senator at a tech fundraiser. Same hands, same eyes, different worlds, but only one truth, and she would find it, even if it meant breaking open a life that wasn't hers anymore. Because that life had started with hers. Because no matter what name the world gave him, she had given him his first one, and she was going to say it again, out loud, to his face, if she had to walk through fire to do it. By Sunday, Margaret had memorized the article. Every line, every quote, every polished phrase that told the story of Ethan Cross, child prodigy, startup wizard, speaker at Stanford's Future Leaders Conference. A life built like a fortress. But even the best-kept lies have fingerprints. She found a paragraph that mentioned an upcoming event, the Future Green Tech Gala, to be held at the Marlowe Hotel in 2 weeks' time. Attendance was invite only. She stared at the line for a long time, then made a decision. Margaret dug out the storage bin beneath her bed, the one with old documents, tax returns, the kind of paperwork everyone forgets until they desperately need it. She pulled out Jacob's birth certificate, held it beside the photo of Ethan from the magazine. Same middle name, Isaac. That wasn't in the article. But Ethan's name, printed on the gala guest list she found online, included it, Ethan Isaac Cross. She felt something in her chest contract. That name wasn't chosen by accident. She called Glenn Rourke again. This time, he answered on the first ring. I pulled what I could, he said. There's no birth certificate on file for Ethan Cross before the adoption. Margaret closed her eyes. I knew it. But, he added, there's also no record of a name change. That's rare. He paused, almost like someone wanted to give him a completely clean start. Not just erase the past, replace it. Her stomach turned. Can we get a DNA test? Not directly. He'd need to consent. He won't. I figured. Margaret turned back to the magazine, to the page with the gala date. I need to see him, she said. Margaret, I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to cause a scene. I just want to stand in the same room. Look him in the eye. Silence. Then Glenn exhaled. I'll make a call. See if I can get you a seat. The next 2 weeks blurred. Margaret moved like someone underwater. She stopped answering the phone. Didn't respond to emails. Didn't tell her sister, or her church group, or the neighbor who still asked if she was doing okay after all these years. Because how do you explain a resurrection no one asked for? The morning of the gala arrived with cold wind and the threat of rain. Margaret stood in front of the mirror for the first time in months, applying light makeup with trembling hands. She wore the dress she'd bought 5 years ago for her niece's wedding. Pale blue, soft around the collar. Jacob had once called it her cloud dress. It didn't matter if Ethan remembered. She did. At the Marlowe Hotel, she stepped into a world that didn't feel real. Glass chandeliers, waiters with trays of champagne, people in suits and gowns talking about energy portfolios and carbon credits. And there, near the stage, he stood. Ethan. Jacob. Her son. He was taller than she imagined. Broader, too. But his laugh hadn't changed. Not really. Still slightly hesitant. Still tilted to the left. He leaned in as someone whispered in his ear. Smiled politely. Nodded. Margaret felt the floor steady beneath her, even as the rest of the world seemed to float. She waited until the speeches ended. Until the lights dimmed and the music resumed. Then, slowly, she crossed the room. He turned as she approached, almost reflexively, as if drawn by something unseen. Their eyes met, and for just a second, a flicker, something inside him shifted. She saw it. Not confusion, not recognition, but something else, like a dream remembered wrong. Ethan? She said, voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her carefully. Yes. My name is Margaret. He blinked. The name meant nothing to him, but his expression changed again. Cautious now. Do I know you? She smiled, but it cracked at the edges. You used to. A long time ago. He stared, and then his body tensed, like a wire pulled tight. I think you're mistaken, he said quickly. I'm sorry, excuse me. He turned, walked away, faster than necessary, almost like he was fleeing. Margaret stood in the middle of the ballroom, heart pounding. She didn't chase, didn't call out. She simply stood there, because sometimes the deepest recognition isn't words. It's retreat. It's the way someone looks at you like they've heard your voice in a dream they were told to forget. And that was enough. For now. The following morning brought a silence so dense it felt alive. Margaret sat at the kitchen table with the gala program open beside her coffee. Her hands still trembled from the night before. Not from fear, but from the quiet, thunderous realization. He saw her. He didn't know why, but he felt something. That pause. That tightening of his jaw. That glance over the shoulder before he left the ballroom floor like a man who had seen a ghost. It wasn't rejection. It was recoil. The body remembering what the mind has buried. She called Glenn. He walked away. There was a beat. Then, how did it feel? Like he's standing in the middle of a bridge. And the second he looked at me, he started walking back to the side he didn't remember existed. Glenn's side on the other end. I pulled some favors, he said. We might have a way. Margaret straightened in her chair. A way? He continued, careful now, like each word was a glass ornament on the verge of cracking. There's a service. Private. discreet. They've helped in a few post-adoption identity cases. If you can get anything recent that belongs to him, we may be able to get a DNA read. Margaret's voice barely rose above the hum of the refrigerator. You mean, take something, borrow? Glenn corrected softly. Something with skin cells, a used glass, a napkin, a strand of hair. Margaret went still. There had been wine glasses on every table at the gala. She remembered. After Ethan or Jacob walked away, she had stayed rooted in place. Stunned. She hadn't noticed much. But when she turned to leave, she had picked something up without thinking. A glass. It was still in her purse, wrapped in the cocktail napkin, untouched since. She hung up, crossed the room, retrieved the glass and unwrapped it on the counter. There, on the rim, was a perfect half-moon of a fingerprint, a smudge of red wine. Her breath caught. She called Glenn back. I have it. 2 days passed before she heard anything. Glenn's voice on the other end wasn't triumphant. It was careful. It's a match, Margaret. 3 words. 3 nails driven into the truth she'd carried for 20 years like a coffin she refused to bury. She didn't speak. Couldn't. He gave her the rest. 100% probability. It's him. Your son. And then, gently, I've submitted the findings to the legal team. We can't force contact. He's an adult. But we can start the process to challenge the original adoption filing. Maybe even find out who brought him in. Margaret finally found her voice. I don't want to take him back. I know. I just want him to know he didn't come from nowhere. She sat in silence after the call, staring at nothing, letting the facts roll over her like cold water. Her son was alive, living under a new name, a new history, a memoryless childhood that wasn't lost. It was stolen, and he had looked her in the eye and turned away, not out of malice, but out of protection. Something inside him still feared the truth. That night, she wrote him a letter, longhand, folded it twice.
No melodrama. No acquiescence.
Just a map back to something real. She didn't send it. Not yet. She placed it in the drawer where his baby teeth still rested in a velvet pouch, beside a lock of hair and the hospital wristband from the day he was born. 3 mornings later, her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She answered. The voice on the other end was quiet, unsteady. Margaret Reynolds? Yes. A pause. Then, my name is Ethan Cross. You spoke to me. At the gala. Margaret closed her eyes. Hello. I don't know why I'm calling, he said. I just couldn't stop thinking about you. Silence. Then, in a voice that cracked, you said I used to know you. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out, because that voice, older now, lined with the weight of years he'd never asked for, was still his, still Jacob's. And in that fragile, scared, searching question, she heard the door creak open. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to step through. Margaret gripped the phone like it might dissolve if she moved too suddenly. On the other end, Ethan's breath stuttered through the speaker. There was a fragile quality to it, not fear exactly, but something close to it. A kind of trembling curiosity, like standing on the edge of a cliff and leaning forward, just enough to feel the drop. She tried to steady her voice. You called? She whispered. I don't know why, he replied again. But when you said your name, when I looked at you, something in me just reacted. And it hasn't stopped. He didn't ask if she was crazy. Didn't accuse her of lying. He just wanted to know. Everything. She hesitated, not out of doubt but protection. His more than hers. So she asked softly, do you remember anything before you were adopted? A long pause. Then, flashes. Smells. A red sweater. A woman singing off-key. I always thought I made it up. Like, it was some broken dream from another life. Her voice caught in her throat. You used to hate that red sweater. Said it was itchy. He laughed. Suddenly, breathlessly. Yeah, it was. God, how do you know that? She let the moment settle. Then said as gently as she could, because I'm the one who made you wear it. They spoke for 20 minutes. She told him his real name, Jacob Isaac Reynolds. She told him about the fair, the balloon, the moment she looked away. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. As though every word filled a hollow space inside him he hadn't known was there. When silence finally came between them, he said, "I need time. Of course. I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything. But I don't want to hang up either." She smiled, tears sliding silently down her cheek. "You don't have to." Eventually, he said he needed to go. "A meeting." "I'll call you again," he said. And this time it wasn't a maybe. It was a promise. After the call ended, Margaret sat still for a long time. There was no music, no background noise, just the sound of the kitchen clock and the weight of breath in her chest. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't reunion. It was a crack in the wall. And from it, something small and golden had begun to seep through. Glenn called that evening. "You heard from him?" "Yes." "Did he believe you?" "I think he believed himself." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she made copies of Jacob's old drawings, pictures of trees and trains and badly drawn cats with 3 legs. She put them in an envelope, along with the photo of him in the red sweater. No note, just a return address. Not to force, just to offer. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. She didn't call, didn't push. She waited, until one afternoon the doorbell rang. Murphy barked once. She wiped her hands and walked to the front door, expecting a package. But when she opened it, she didn't find a box. She found him, Ethan, Jacob, standing on her porch, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes wide and unguarded. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. She laughed, one hand covering her mouth. He held up the envelope she'd sent. "I remember this," he whispered, holding the drawing up. "This one was for your birthday." "It was. I drew the sun in purple. You told me it was brave." Her voice cracked. "It was brave." Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he asked, "Can I come in?" She opened the door wider. And her son, grown now, taller than her, shoulders carrying the weight of 2 decades of misnamed years, stepped back into her house. The same house where his toys still lived in boxes. The same kitchen where his laugh had once echoed across morning pancakes. She made tea. They sat. And though the words didn't all come that day, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like breath held between verses. A pause before the next line of a song that never truly ended. The tea grew cold before either of them touched it. Jacob, no, Ethan, sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same spot he used to beg for more syrup or sneak raisins to the dog under the table. Now, his hands rested quietly on the surface, long fingers drumming softly against the grain. He scanned the room like a man looking for something he didn't remember losing. Margaret watched him closely, memorizing everything. The way his left foot tapped restlessly. The way his jaw tightened when silence stretched too long. He looked so much like his father in that moment that it knocked the breath from her lungs. She broke the stillness. "You liked peanut butter and banana sandwiches," she said. He smiled faintly. "I still do. Light on the banana, heavy on the peanut butter. You said it tasted like glue and candy." A small laugh escaped him. It was real. "I have dreams sometimes," he said softly. "I didn't think much of them. A song, a smell, a light blue blanket, a woman humming." Margaret nodded slowly. "I used to hum when I did dishes. You'd sit under the table and make up stories about the soap bubbles being clouds full of secrets." His gaze dropped to his hands. "I was 4. It shouldn't be possible to remember." She reached across the table, not to touch him, just to close the space. Some memories bury themselves so deep that they don't come up until something scratches the dirt. He looked up. "I don't know who I am right now." "You don't have to pick one side," she said gently. "You can carry both." He blinked fast. "I don't remember being yours. I remember enough for both of us." They stayed like that for a while. Not mother and son. Not strangers. Something suspended between the two. A tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but alive. Later, she brought out the box. The one with the red sweater. the plastic dinosaur with one eye, a laminated fingerprint card from preschool. He sat with it like someone holding an urn, touched each object slowly. Then, without looking up, he said, "My parents, the ones who raised me, they didn't know." Margaret swallowed. "I wondered. They adopted me legally, from someone who claimed to be a distant relative. No one questioned it." He held the sweater to his chest. "I always felt like something was missing, like there was a hallway in my head with a locked door at the end." Margaret smiled sadly. "Turns out the key was in aisle 3 of a grocery store." He stayed for an hour. Then 2. They didn't try to define it, didn't plan what came next. When he stood to leave, he looked at her carefully. "I don't want to disappear again." Her voice trembled. "You won't." At the door, he turned back. "I don't know what to call you." She stepped closer. "You can call me whatever feels true." A long pause. Then, with the softness of someone unlearning fear, "Okay, Mom." When the door closed behind him, Margaret didn't cry. She simply stood in the hallway, eyes closed, hand on her heart. Because a name had returned to her lips. Not Ethan, not even Jacob, but mine. Over the next few weeks, they met again. Coffee shops, walks in the park, quiet dinners, never long but always warm. Each meeting was a stone laid on a path neither of them knew they were building. He asked questions. About his father. About his toys. About how he got the scar on his shin. She reminded him. He tried to roller skate down the basement stairs. He laughed. And she did too. One evening, he showed her a photo of himself as a teenager, awkward and lanky, wearing a too big backpack. "I always hated this picture," he said. She smiled. "I love it. You look like you're running toward something." He looked at her, and then said, "I think I was." Spring crept in quietly, greening the world without fanfare. Margaret stood at the edge of her garden, watching the daffodils stretch upward. For years, she'd planted them out of habit, a cycle that meant nothing more than time passing. But this year, the yellow blooms felt like a whisper. He's here. He's home. At least part of him. Ethan, no, Jacob, as she was starting to hear again, had begun texting regularly. Not long messages, just flashes of thought. "Saw a woman with the same laugh you used to have. I remembered the soap smell you mentioned. Lemon mint. Can you send more pictures?" She sent him one of his 3rd birthday. He was covered in frosting, wearing a crown made of paper towel tubes. His smile was pure joy, open, unguarded, full. He replied, "I don't recognize him, but I miss him anyway." He agreed to meet Glenn. They sat at a booth in a quiet diner off the highway, where no one recognized either of them. Glenn didn't push. He only offered what he knew. The timeline, the search, the years spent chasing shadows. Jacob listened without blinking. "So I was just gone," he said at last. "And nobody saw it." Glenn's voice was tired, heavy. "Someone made you disappear. We just didn't know how deep it went." Jacob nodded and said, "Then I want to know." That afternoon, Margaret watched from her living room window as Glenn handed Jacob a folder. Thick, bound in twine. Inside, 20 years of reports, sketches, witness interviews, dead ends. Jacob didn't take it lightly. He didn't speak for a long time after opening it. Then he said, "I think I've been asking who I am for a long time. I didn't know the answer was stolen." He began researching. Margaret lent him what she had, newspaper clippings, case notes, the old flyer with his toddler photo under the bold headline missing. He asked about the man who had brought him to the adoption agency. She didn't know. Neither did Glenn. Whoever it was had used a false name and vanished after the paperwork cleared. But there were hints. A photo. A shaky ID sketch from a parking lot witness who had never been followed up with. A man in his 50s, thinning gray hair, a mole under his right eye. Jacob held the sketch like it might melt in his hands. "I've seen him," he said. Margaret looked up sharply. "Where?" "In dreams," he murmured. "But I don't think they were dreams." Margaret didn't ask for more, didn't push, but she could see it stirring inside him. The need to unearth the lost. Not for closure. For reclamation. A week later, Jacob called with a new voice. Focused. Quietly lit with purpose. I want to go to the fairgrounds. Margaret went silent. That's where. I know. She exhaled slowly. Okay. I'll take you. The fairground was smaller than he expected. The banners had changed. The colors faded. But the bones were the same. He stood near the southern fence, staring toward the back lot where the balloon vendor used to set up. I think it happened here, he said. How can you tell? He shook his head. I don't know. I just feel it. Margaret reached for his hand. For the first time, he didn't flinch. They walked slowly. He asked if she had ever blamed herself. She said yes every day. And he said softly, don't. Then added, I think I came back not just for me. She looked at him. I think I came back for you too. The wind picked up. Petals scattered. A child's laughter echoed from somewhere distant, sharp and bright. Jacob turned toward it like a magnet. And for a moment Margaret saw it, that tilt of the head, that open expression. The boy he used to be flickered beneath the man he had become. He turned back, smiled, and it wasn't Ethan's smile. It was Jacob's, the kind of smile you give someone who remembers your name before you even learn to write it. Jacob didn't return to his apartment that night. Instead, he stayed at Margaret's house. Not because they had planned it, but because when she asked, Are you tired? He had simply nodded and said, A little. She made up the guest room, fresh sheets, clean pillow, and a blanket folded like she used to fold it when he was small. Edges tucked under, corners creased like safety itself. He stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping in. The house didn't feel like a memory to him. It didn't trigger some sudden rush of recognition. It felt possible. That was enough. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. Bookshelf, small dresser, a lamp with a cracked ceramic base. On the nightstand, she had placed a photo, one of his old ones. Him, 3 years old, face sticky with jam, eyes wide and alive. He picked it up. Was I always like that? He asked. Margaret stood in the doorway, hands clasped. Loud, happy, always moving. You used to chase shadows on the wall and call them monsters you were trying to tame. He smiled faintly. I don't think I ever stopped. That night he couldn't sleep. He wandered the house, quiet as a breath, stopped in front of the hallway closet, pulled it open. Inside boxes, coats, the same smell of lemon polish and old air. And on the top shelf, the plastic tub. Jacob, 1999. He brought it down, sat cross-legged on the living room rug and opened it under the soft lamplight. Inside, memory. Tangible. Heavy. Drawings. A sock puppet. A wooden train with a chipped wheel. And at the bottom, something he hadn't seen in decades but recognized instantly. A small, red and blue plastic key. He turned it in his hand. This was mine. Margaret, now awake and sitting silently in the doorway, nodded. It was for your treasure box. You used to lock your important things in it. One rock, a jelly bean, a ribbon. You called it your heart locker. He closed his fingers around it. Then, voice thin, I used to dream about this key. For years. I didn't know it was real. The next morning, Jacob made breakfast. He moved around the kitchen with caution, like someone cooking in a stranger's house. But his hands found the rhythm. 2 plates, toast, eggs, coffee. They sat in the sunroom, light spilling across the table. And for the first time in decades, Margaret didn't eat alone. Later, he said, I want to meet the people who raised me. Margaret didn't speak at first. Then, you should. They loved you, didn't they? Yes, they were good to me, but I need to ask them why they never questioned it. Why they didn't wonder why I had no memories. She nodded slowly. And you need to ask them why your file said you were an orphan. He looked out the window. Exactly. The meeting was scheduled 3 days later. Jacob traveled alone. Margaret stayed home. Didn't ask for updates. Didn't press. But the house was full of movement. Her hands couldn't stay still. She vacuumed, then folded laundry that didn't need folding. dusted photo frames she hadn't looked at in years. When the doorbell rang at dusk, she jumped. But it wasn't Jacob. It was Glenn. He brought documents, things newly unsealed, legal inconsistencies in the adoption filing.
À Forged notary signature.
A misdated medical exam. The adoption, though finalized, had been processed through a private facilitator who had since vanished. Margaret's hands trembled as she flipped through. So someone knew. Someone had to know. Glenn nodded. They paid for a lie. Jacob returned the next morning. He looked tired, but calm. They were shocked, he said. Sick about it. Said they were told I was abandoned by family. They tried to find more answers later but were stonewalled. Told it would reopen trauma. And they believed it? They had to. I was a child who never cried about the past. Who didn't ask where he came from. He looked down. I think I was taught to forget. Margaret's voice shook. They didn't steal you, but someone did. He sat on the couch. Everything I've built, it's all real. But the foundation, she finished it for him, was taken from you. He nodded. Do you still want it? She meant his life, his name, his family, his new identity. He looked at her and said quietly, I want to rebuild it, with both names. That evening they sat side by side in the backyard. No words, just quiet. The sun dipped low, gold spilling through trees. She reached over, gently touched his shoulder. And for the first time he leaned into it. Not as Ethan, not as Jacob. Just as a man coming home to something that had waited 20 years to be remembered. Jacob didn't change his name right away. He didn't have to. It wasn't about shedding Ethan. That identity had kept him alive. Taught him how to navigate a world where the beginning had been cut out of the book. But now he had the missing pages. So he kept both names. On his next business card it read, Ethan Jacob Cross Reynolds. A small rebellion. A quiet reclamation. Margaret kept the envelope he'd sent it in, taped it inside her kitchen cabinet where the recipes used to go. Every time she opened the door, she saw it. Mom, thought you'd want to see it first. They continued to meet, building slowly, steadily. Jacob brought over takeout sometimes. She learned to like sushi. He fixed the squeaky cabinet door she had stopped noticing. She taught him how to fold a fitted sheet without cursing. One Saturday, they visited his old elementary school. Margaret watched him walk the halls in silence, trailing his fingers along lockers that hadn't known his name. He stood outside a classroom door. Do you think I would have gone here? He asked. She nodded. You were supposed to start kindergarten the year after you disappeared. He turned to her. I was excited about it, wasn't I? She smiled gently. You cried when we bought your backpack because it wasn't red. So I took it back and got the red one. You wore it every day before school started. Just to practice. He laughed, then went quiet. There's a version of me that never had to forget. Margaret placed a hand on his back. And a version that fought to remember. They stopped by the small playground behind the school. Jacob sat on a swing and rocked gently. Margaret sat beside him. The wind was soft. The air held that early summer smell of cut grass and sidewalk chalk. He said, I still feel like two people. You are. He looked over. That doesn't scare you? She shook her head. It only means you've lived more than one life. And now you get to choose which pieces you carry forward. That night, Jacob emailed her a scan of something she'd never expected to see. A baby photo. Him. Around 5. Taken shortly after he was adopted. She stared at it on her screen, fingers hovering over the trackpad. It was him. Same eyes. Same mouth. But something different. The background was sterile. A blank wall. The smile was thin. Like someone told him to smile and he obeyed. Below the image, in faded ink, Jacob, age 5, now Ethan. She zoomed in. Who had written that? And why had they kept his original name? She sent the photo to Glenn. He called an hour later. There's handwriting on the back, matched to a known associate of that adoption facilitator we couldn't trace. The guy disappeared in 2006 after being investigated for falsifying birth records. Margaret's voice was thin. So someone knew. From the beginning. They didn't just steal him. They documented it. And then sold him clean. The case reopened. Quietly. Not public. Not yet. But investigators started digging. Jacob offered his testimony. Did interviews. Reopened every file with his own signature now attached. And in doing so unearthed something darker. There were others. Children like him. Adopted under sealed files. With no medical histories. No prior schooling. Just blank slates. Like he had been. One afternoon, he sat in Margaret's backyard. Scrolling his phone with a faraway look. They used to call me a miracle, he said. She looked up from her gardening. You were. But not the way they meant it. He looked at her. They meant I came from nowhere. That I started at 5. She stood, brushed soil from her hands, and walked over. No one starts at 5. He nodded. And no one should be told to forget what came before. They sat in silence again. It had become a rhythm, these pauses between grief and rediscovery. And then Jacob said something that sat between them like a single lit candle. I think I want to testify, publicly. Margaret blinked. Are you sure? His voice didn't waver. I spent years thinking I was lucky to be where I am. And I was. But I wasn't just lucky. He looked out over the fence line. Toward the horizon. I was taken. And if I don't say that, who will? She nodded. Then softly. Then we say it together. The first interview aired 2 weeks later. A long-form special. National. Quietly promoted but widely watched. Jacob sat in a dim studio, the camera soft on his face. The host didn't sensationalize, it wasn't that kind of story. It began simply. Ethan Cross, known for his groundbreaking tech company and philanthropic work, has recently come forward with a truth that changes everything about his past. Then Jacob, calm, precise, and unwavering, told the story. Not all the details, but enough. Margaret watched from home, alone. She sat with her hands folded tightly, afraid they might tremble if she let them go. On screen, he spoke with a steady voice, but she could hear the undertow. The emotion pressed between syllables. I was adopted when I was 5. I grew up with a wonderful family who believed they'd given a child a second chance. But I'd already had a family, a mother, a life. He looked into the camera. My name was Jacob Reynolds, and I was abducted. The world responded instantly. Headlines, messages, confusion, compassion, doubt, and then recognition. 3 more people came forward within the week. Grown men and women, adopted under similar circumstances, began to question the paperwork that had always felt too thin, too clean. An entire thread began to unravel. Margaret received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside, a photograph, a group of children, a man in the background, gray hair, mole under the eye. On the back, written in block letters, I remember him. She brought it to Glenn. He scanned it and cross-referenced the photo with old police files. That's our guy, he said. The one who brought Jacob to the agency. We have a name now. She swallowed hard. Then it's not just memory. It's proof. Jacob read the letter with her. He held the photograph in silence for several minutes. Then quietly said, he gave me a different name, told me Margaret had died in a fire, that my real name was Ethan, and I was lucky to be alive. His hand trembled slightly as he passed the photo back. I didn't know that was a lie until I saw you. The investigation widened. News outlets started using his real name, alternating between Jacob and Ethan depending on the context. A congressional committee reached out, asked if he would speak before them. He agreed, but not alone. I want my mother there, he said. They made space for Margaret beside him at the hearing. Capitol Hill was colder than she expected. The hearing room full, cameras rolling. Faces she didn't recognize leaning forward to catch every word. She wore the same light blue dress from the gala, the cloud dress. He wore a gray suit. They sat together. And when Jacob spoke, The world held its breath. I was not just a missing child. I was hidden, rewritten. And this is not just about me. It's about the systems that let it happen. He paused, looked at Margaret. I am not asking for pity. I am asking for prevention. And then Margaret spoke, softly, but with the force of every year she had lived without him. They told me to move on, to let go. But you don't let go of a child. You wait for him, and you keep waiting until he remembers the way home. They received a standing ovation, not from the senators, but from the people behind them. Families, survivors, mothers who never gave up. In the weeks that followed, new policies were drafted. Private adoption agencies were audited. Old case files reopened, and a task force was created. Its name? The Jacob Initiative. Margaret stood in her garden one morning, watering the new hydrangeas. Jacob's voice came from the porch behind her. Nice aim, he said. She looked back. He held a mug of coffee, squinting into the light. Still remember how to burn toast? She grinned.
Tradition.
They spent the day planting. And when it got quiet, Jacob asked, What do you want to do with the room? Margaret looked up. The guest room. He nodded. I think I want to repaint it. She paused. Any color in mind? He shrugged. Red. She tilted her head. He smiled. Thought I'd make peace with that sweater. Later that evening, she found him sitting at the kitchen table. He was holding the old plastic key again. You still have the treasure box? He asked. She nodded. Buried in the attic. He looked at her. Can we dig it up? She smiled. And that night they did. The treasure box was exactly where Margaret remembered it. Tucked in the corner of the attic beneath an old quilt and a collapsed cardboard box filled with baby books and dusty ornaments. She pulled it out gently, her fingers shaking more from memory than effort. The lid was faded, the plastic warped slightly by years of summer heat and winter cold. But the lock was intact. Jacob knelt beside her. It's smaller than I thought. Margaret chuckled. You once said it was big enough to hide the whole moon. He turned the little red and blue key in the lock. Clicked open. Inside, nothing. Just the faint scent of time. He laughed softly. Well, he said. I guess I already took all the treasure. She smiled. You did. And left it scattered all over the house. They sat on the attic floor for a while. Legs crossed, treasure box between them like a peace offering between the past and present. Jacob looked around at the dim beams, the soft glow from a single bulb overhead. This feels like a place where time folds. Margaret nodded. I think that's what attics are for. He tilted his head. I'm glad you kept everything. Her voice was quiet. I had to. If I didn't, it'd be like saying you weren't coming back. The next morning, he brought over a folder. Inside, notarized paperwork. He was adding her to his legal records as his biological mother. No longer a lost relative. No longer unknown. She stared at the page for a long moment, then traced her finger over his signature. You don't have to do this, she whispered. He looked at her. I want to. They went together to the courthouse. It was quiet, procedural. A few signatures. A quiet nod from the clerk who didn't know the story and wouldn't have believed it if she did. When they walked out, Margaret blinked into the sunlight. Feels different, she said. Jacob turned to her. It's not a new beginning, he said. It's just an honest continuation. Later that week, they visited the cemetery. Jacob hadn't been there since he was a boy, when he visited his father's grave for the last time before he disappeared. Margaret led the way. The stone was small, simple. Thomas Reynolds. Beloved husband and father. Jacob crouched beside it, ran his fingers over the etched letters. I never got to grieve him, he said. Not properly. Margaret stood beside him, hands folded. You used to sit beside the stone and talk to it like he could hear. He smiled. I think he did. Then Jacob reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote something, he said. For him. For me. She didn't ask to read it. He placed it at the base of the stone. The wind caught the corner, but it stayed. They walked home in silence. No rush. No reason to fill the spaces between words. Time felt wider now. Back at the house, Jacob went to the bookshelf, pulled down one of Margaret's old photo albums. He sat at the table, flipping through slowly. "Can I scan these?" he asked. "I want to make a timeline." Margaret blinked. "For what?" He looked up, eyes bright. "For a book." She smiled. "A memoir." He shrugged. "Sort of. But not just mine." Then, quieter, ours. That night he started writing. Margaret found him still awake at 2 a.m., tapping away at his laptop, surrounded by old photographs, case notes, drawings, and the treasure box now filled with small mementos he had collected in the last few months. She didn't interrupt. She just placed a cup of tea on the table. He looked up. "Thank you." "For what?" "For waiting." She reached over, touched his hand. "I never stopped." As dawn crept in, Jacob wrote the first sentence of his book. "I didn't come from nowhere. I came from a voice that never stopped calling me back." Word spread about the memoir before Jacob had even finished the second chapter. An agent reached out, then a publisher, then 3 more. But Jacob turned them all down. "I don't want this to be a product," he told Margaret one afternoon as they sat in the sunroom, surrounded by drafts and old photographs. "This isn't a brand. It's a truth." Margaret nodded, understanding. "Then tell it your way." So he did. He self-published. Quietly. No press tour. No glossy launch. Just a simple website, a single video, and a quiet message. For the ones who were never believed. For the ones still searching. He titled it "The Distance Between Two Names." Within a week, thousands had downloaded it. Within a month, it had circled through every survivors group and support network in the country. But it wasn't the sales that mattered. It was the messages. From strangers. From lost children. From parents still leaving porch lights on, just in case. One letter arrived by mail, handwritten in shaky script. "I don't know if I'm one of them, but after reading your story, I finally believe it's okay to ask." Another email came from a man in his 40s. "I thought my earliest memories were just trauma dreams. Turns out they were someone else's truth. You gave me permission to listen." Margaret read every message. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. But always, she saved them. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded. New cases were linked. New identities verified. The man with the mole, Jacob's abductor, was tracked to a quiet town in Oregon. He had changed his name, bought a hardware store, lived in plain sight for years. The arrest was uneventful. Jacob didn't attend the arraignment. He didn't need to. The man's silence in court was louder than any confession. Back home, Jacob and Margaret celebrated his birthday for the first time in 21 years. Not Ethan's. Not the court-assigned adoption date. His birthday, March 6th. She made lemon cake, his favorite, he had recently discovered. The recipe hadn't changed. Neither had her handwriting on the recipe card. He studied it, smiling. "Your R's look like boats," he said. "They always have." They ate on the porch as dusk fell.
No candles. No noise.
Just warmth. He clinked his glass against hers. "To every version of us," he said. She lifted hers. "And to the one we found again." That night, Margaret pulled out a final box from the back of the closet. Inside, a VHS tape, labeled in red marker, Jacob's 4th birthday. She looked at it, then at him. "You want to see it?" He hesitated, then nodded. She connected the old player to the TV. The screen flickered, static, then color. A cake on the table. A little boy in a paper crown. He ran across the screen and threw his arms around a woman holding a balloon. Jacob leaned forward. "Pause it." She did. He stared at the screen. "That's me." Margaret didn't speak. She didn't have to. Tears ran down his face. But he wasn't crying from sadness. It was something quieter, deeper, recognition. He was watching the moment before everything broke. But he wasn't broken anymore. When the tape ended, he turned to her. "I think I'd like to stay a while." She smiled. Stay as long as you want. He looked around, then said, maybe forever. She didn't say anything at first, just stood, walked to the hallway, and turned on the porch light. He watched her. What are you doing? She looked back. I left it on every night, even after they told me to stop hoping. She turned the switch off. And now, I don't have to. Jacob stepped beside her. Together, they stood in the glow of a home that remembered every version of who he had been, and waited patiently for him to come home. The days fell into rhythm. Jacob stayed in the guest room at first, but it didn't take long before he began calling it his room. Margaret never corrected him. They fell into habits, small things that built themselves like bricks in a wall of familiarity. He watered the plants before she woke. She left a cup of tea at his door when he worked late. Sometimes they barely spoke, but their silences had changed. They were no longer full of loss. They were full of presence. One morning, Margaret found him in the garage. He was holding a bike frame, rusted, the chain long gone, tires flattened by time. I used to ride this? He asked. She nodded. You called it the Zoom Zoom rocket. He laughed softly. Seriously? You insisted it could fly. I didn't argue. He turned the frame in his hands. I don't remember it, but something in me still loves it. Margaret smiled. Maybe that's all memory really is. What stays even when the names fade. Jacob began writing again, this time more personal. Not for the public, just for himself. Pages filled with pieces of memory, smells, dreams, flashbulb images of blue sky through slats in wood, of cinnamon toast, of someone singing out of tune. He started recording them on tape. Maybe someday I'll remember more, he said. Or maybe I won't. But I want something to hand down. To who? Margaret asked one evening. He paused. Maybe a child. Maybe no one. Maybe just the world. That fall, they planted a tree. A red maple. The tag said it would grow fast and tall, roots deep, branches wide. They placed it in the middle of the backyard where the sun touched it most. This will outlive us both, Jacob said, pressing soil over the roots. Margaret placed her hand on his shoulder. That's the point. On the first cold night of the season, Jacob pulled an old blanket from the closet and curled up on the living room couch. Margaret handed him a book. He flipped through it absently, then stopped. Hey, he said. She looked up. This picture, me and Dad at the lake. I do remember this. She blinked. You do. He nodded slowly, voice hushed. There was a fish. He said I scared it away by laughing too loud. A pause. I didn't believe him. Margaret smiled, swallowing the lump in her throat. That sounds exactly like him. The memories came gently now, not in floods, but in ripples. They arrived in his sleep, in the scent of pine on the wind, in the echo of a song on the radio he didn't know the words to, but somehow knew how it ended. They visited the fairgrounds once more. Jacob stood in the same spot. This time he didn't say anything. He just looked around, then closed his eyes, and whispered, I forgive it. Margaret touched his arm. Not because it deserves it, he added. She nodded. But because I won't let it own me anymore. That winter the publisher came calling again. This time not about the memoir. They wanted to adapt it. Film. Documentary. The full story. Jacob hesitated. He asked Margaret, what if it becomes something else? She shrugged. Then we tell it again. The right way. He thought for a long time, then agreed. On one condition. I narrate it. She grinned. Of course you do. Production began in early spring. Margaret sat behind the monitors as Jacob recited from his book. His voice steady, slow, tinged with that softness he reserved only for her and the dog. When he read the line, I didn't come from nowhere. Everyone on set went quiet. The director lowered his headphones. That's the take. He whispered. After the shoot, Jacob pulled her aside. I've been thinking. That's dangerous, she teased. He smiled. No, really. About changing my name. She raised an eyebrow. Again? Legally, just simplifying. She waited. Just Jacob Reynolds, he said. No more hyphens. No more halfway identities. She didn't answer right away, so he added, I think I've finally walked far enough to know where I started. She stepped forward, placed her hand over his heart. Then welcome back. He exhaled, like someone setting down a weight they hadn't realized they were still carrying. That night, he filed the paperwork. And for the first time since he was 4 years old, his name was once again his own. The legal confirmation arrived in a slim white envelope. Margaret found it in the mailbox one cool morning, tucked between a charity catalog and a grocery flyer. She held it in her hand, stared at the printed government seal, then walked it slowly inside. She didn't open it. She left it on Jacob's desk. By the time he returned that afternoon, the sunlight had already shifted across the wooden floor. The envelope sat like something sacred, quiet but powerful. He picked it up, breathed in once, slow, then tore it open. Inside one page, a certificate of legal name change. Ethan Isaac Cross, Jacob Isaac Reynolds. He stood there for a long time. Margaret waited across the room, not wanting to break the silence that felt more holy than still. Then Jacob looked up, eyes shimmering. I feel like I've been underwater for years, he said, voice breaking. And this is the breath I didn't know I needed. Margaret stepped forward. You never stopped being him. He nodded. But now the world agrees. The documentary premiered a month later. The distance between two names was streamed by millions in its first week. But it wasn't the numbers that mattered, it was the resonance. There were no reenactments, no grim music, just Jacob, in his own words, reclaiming a past that had been taken without permission. In one of the final scenes, he sat in the old-school playground, swinging gently, saying, I don't remember every face. I don't remember the man who took me, but I remember that someone was looking for me, and that's what brought me back. The response was overwhelming. People wrote letters, teachers, adopted children, parents still waiting. Margaret received one message that left her breathless. I never thought anyone would believe my story, but if he can be found after 20 years, maybe there's still time for my daughter. She printed it, framed it, hung it next to Jacob's old drawing of the purple sun. Then came the part they hadn't expected. Children began to come forward. Not just grown adults, but teenagers, kids, people who had long suspected their stories were incomplete, that their identities didn't start where the paper said they did. Some were confirmed, some were not, but each case became part of a growing chorus, a song of reclamation, and Jacob stood in the center of it, not as a victim, but as a guide. The government restructured the task force. Funding increased. A new arm was formed within the Department of Justice, Child Recovery and Identity Justice. Jacob consulted, not as a tech founder, not as a media face, but as a survivor. One night, Margaret found him asleep on the couch, laptop still open beside him. On the screen, a spreadsheet of names, dates, identifiers, cases he was reviewing personally. She covered him with a blanket, paused the screen, and whispered, Rest now, sweetheart. You've done enough for today. Later, she would tell friends it felt like watching her son become himself in reverse. Like every day peeled back a layer of what had been forced over him. He laughed more now, walked taller, let himself be vulnerable without apology. One afternoon, they drove back to the lake, the same place where the photo had been taken. Him and his father, fishing before time split apart. They didn't bring rods, just themselves. Jacob stood at the edge of the dock, hands in his pockets. The breeze moved through his hair, the sun blinking between the clouds. I used to be afraid I'd never know who I was, he said. Margaret stood beside him. And now, he looked out over the water. Now I'm building him, one truth at a time. They sat on a bench until the sun dipped low. On the way back to the car, he reached into his pocket and handed her something small. It was the red plastic key. I think you should keep it again, he said. She closed her fingers around it. I always did. When they got home, the porch light was already on. He looked at her, a gentle smile playing on his lips. You forgot to turn it off. She shook her head.
No.
I just like seeing it glow. He laughed softly, then added, It suits the house. She paused, looked up at the light. No, she said. It suits you. Autumn came again. The tree they had planted, the red maple, had begun to turn. Its leaves flamed gold and scarlet, its trunk stronger, taller, a marker of time, of healing, of the quiet, steady rebuild of a life once fractured. Margaret and Jacob sat beneath it one afternoon, mugs of cider warm in their hands. She watched as he scrolled through messages on his phone. Updates from the task force, news from survivors, thank you notes from people across the country. He paused on one. A photo. A girl, maybe 16, holding a small sign. He made me believe I'm not crazy. He handed the phone to Margaret. She saw the documentary, then found her real family 6 days later. Margaret's throat tightened. You did that, she said. He shook his head gently. We did that. That night, Jacob cooked dinner. A quiet ritual now. Thursdays were his night. He made pasta. Too much garlic, just the way she liked it. And they ate with the windows open, the cool wind drifting through the house like a friendly ghost. After, he brought out an old photo album she hadn't opened in years. This was the page you stopped at, he said, pointing to the blank space after his 4th birthday photos. I want to fill it. He had already printed new photos. From their first meeting at the gala. From the day they planted the maple. From the courthouse. Margaret stared at them. And then carefully, one by one, she placed them into the empty sleeves. At the bottom of the page, Jacob had written in block letters. Jacob's return. Age 25. Right on time. They finished the album in silence. When they closed the cover, she touched his hand. I thought I'd lost everything. He looked at her. You were the reason I was found. That weekend, the community center invited Jacob to speak. Not just about his story, but about identity, resilience, and belonging. He stepped up to the microphone in a room full of strangers and said, I am not here to relive trauma. I'm here because truth doesn't go away, even when you cover it. I'm here because someone waited for me, and I came back. In the crowd, Margaret watched him like a prayer answered twice. Not just returned, but restored. Later that night, they stood on the porch once more. The light hummed above them. Margaret leaned on the railing. Jacob joined her. I think I want to stay, he said. She glanced over. You already are. He nodded. Then, no, I mean really stay. Move back in. Just for a while. Until I figure out what comes next. Margaret blinked back the rush of emotion. I'd like that. She paused, then asked, almost playfully, top bunk or bottom bunk? He grinned. Neither. Guest room's mine now, remember? She laughed. Right? King of the house. He raised his mug. To the queen who never stopped looking. She tapped hers to his. To the boy who walked himself home. That night, Margaret wrote in her journal. A habit she'd picked up again. After all these years. She wrote only one line. He didn't just survive. He returned. Then she turned out the light. And for the first time in 2 decades, she slept without dreaming of the past. Because the future had finally arrived. And it knew her name. Some stories don't end with a headline. They don't end with an arrest or a courtroom or even a name change. Some stories end with a cup of tea on a quiet morning. The hum of a porch light still warm from the night before, and the sound of someone humming in the kitchen. Off-key, but familiar. Jacob's return wasn't cinematic. It was slow, careful, held together not by drama, but by choice. Each visit, each memory, each new leaf on the tree outside the window was a decision to stay, to rebuild, to belong again. Margaret didn't get back the 20 years she lost, but she got him. Not the child in the red sweater, but the man who survived the forgetting, who turned the fracture into foundation, who let love in even when memory stayed out. And Jacob? He didn't remember everything, but he remembered enough. enough to write new pages, to speak names that had been stolen, to sit at his mother's table and laugh like he never left. Their story didn't end when he was found. It began again softly, bravely, and in that new beginning, they built something greater than what was lost. A home not made of walls or proof, but of truth, and the light that never went out.